friends. Today let us discuss the sectors which are there in the Indian economy. Actually, the topic which has been given in the syllabus is the sections of the Indian economy, the agricultural sections and the non-agricultural sections. So I thought of discussing this in a little more detail, and that is why I have, rather than just talking about the agriculture, non-agriculture section, I'll give you an idea about the total sectors which are there in the Indian economy in a more comprehensive fashion, so that you can have a better understanding of the functioning of the Indian economy. So probably you would recall from your earlier discussions in other subjects that you have studied, including the Indian economy and business environment, that there are basically three sectors in an economy. The first one is the primary sector. Now, what basically is the primary sector, you know already. You can have a look at the pictures which are shown here. Tilling the field, top left, the first picture on the top left, tilling the field, growing crops, then hunting down animals, and then you can see top right, cattle rearing, wherein you rear cattle and obtain the various products and then probably sell it into the market, including milk and other products. For example, even cow dung and cow urine is sold, milk is sold. So these, you may be rearing a sheep for wool also. So this is another kind of a primary activity. Then you see bottom left, there is mining taking place, and then somebody is fishing also. So these all activities are basically included in the primary sector. Basically, many a times we call these particular activities, we term them as agriculture and allied activities. Agriculture and allied activities. Now, what do we mean by allied activities? They are they're closely related to agriculture. So agriculture is one activity, and then all those activities which are closely linked to agriculture, they are called allied activities. These could include hunting, these could include felling of trees, logging. So these could also include, for example, horticulture, which is growing of fruits and vegetables, floriculture, growing of flowers, pisciculture, growing fishes, maintaining fishes so that you can further sell them in the market. Then you can also have silkworms and try and produce silk, which is called sericulture. So these are all agriculture allied activities. And then if you add them up with the mining activities, this ultimately is called as the primary sector. So all these activities are included in primary sector: agriculture, allied activities, and mining. Right. Now let us talk about the second sector of an economy, which is the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector basically does what? It adds value to the products which are obtained from nature. The primary sector basically deals with the products that are obtained from nature. It does not add much value to these products. While in manufacturing sector, you basically do what? You add value to whatever has been obtained from the nature by the primary sector, or whatever has been provided to you by the primary sector as the raw material. I'll give you an example. Suppose, for example, you are mining coal. That will be an activity which will be included in primary sector. However, if that coal is used to generate heat energy and to produce steam and to run turbines, or to maybe run a furnace so that steel can be produced, now basically what you are doing is you are basically into the manufacturing sector, because you are using the raw material obtained from the primary sector so that you can produce those items which have added value. For example, if you are growing apples, that is an activity in the primary sector, but when you process these apples to produce apple jam or apple juice, then it becomes a manufacturing sector activity, right? So you know that manufacturing sector again plays a very important role. Apart from the primary sector, manufacturing sector actually adds value to the items which it obtains from the primary sector, and generally the items that the primary sector produces is used as a raw material for the manufacturing sector or the secondary sector of the economy. Now let us talk about the tertiary sector of the economy. Tertiary sector basically is the services sector. You can see those people who are engaged in tertiary sector services. These include lawyers, and you can have a look at the picture here. The doctors, nurses, receptionists, plumber is there, a cook is there, right? So a teacher is also there. So these all activities are part of the tertiary sector. So tertiary sector is basically all about the services. So now we have basically got three different sectors. So there are three sectors in an economy: primary, secondary and tertiary. And now let us have a look at the contribution of each of these sectors to the employment generation in our country, as well as to the overall GDP of the country. So contribution to employment, as far as the primary sector is concerned, it employs 44% of our workforce, almost half of the jobs, almost 44%, just a tad smaller than half of the jobs. They are generated by the primary sector, while manufacturing sector only generates 25% of the jobs which are there in the economy, only 1/4 of the jobs, and the services sector generates around 31%, almost 1/3 of the jobs which are there in the economy. So in terms of generation of jobs, you can understand that primary sector plays a major role, followed by services sector and the manufacturing sector. On the other hand, if you look at the contribution to GDP, you find that the service sector has the largest contribution to GDP, almost 61%, even more than 50%, even more. It has a majority contribution to GDP. 61% is a big figure, while the primary sector only contributes 16% to the overall GDP of the country. Manufacturing sector is contributing almost 23%. Now, basically, we know that as far as the primary sector in India is concerned, the most important constituent of the primary sector is the agricultural activity. So the agricultural section, if somebody talks about, and if somebody wants you to talk about the agricultural section, basically you have to also talk about the primary sector minus the mining portion. So you have to discuss primary sector, but you have to leave out the mining portion. So agriculture, and if somebody has to write about the non-agricultural sections of the society, so you have to basically talk about mining plus the manufacturing plus the services sector, or the secondary and the tertiary sectors, right? Now this particular figure that you are seeing here in the data that you are looking at on your screen, please understand this actually points to a deepening problem in our primary sector, specifically the agricultural sections of the Indian society. You understand that they are contributing almost 44% to job growth, but their contribution to GDP is way less, only 16%. While if you look at services, their contribution to employment is much less, while their contribution to GDP is way higher. It's almost double of their contribution to employment. So they are contributing 31% to the employment, but they are contributing almost 61% to the national GDP. What does this mean? Basically, this means that primary sector is not able to contribute that much despite employing the largest number of people, which means that probably our primary sector has to improve its efficiency to be able to contribute more, since it is already employing the largest number of people. So if it has to improve its contribution to the Indian economy, it will have to improve its efficiency. And this is also giving an idea why specifically the agricultural sections of the Indian society, they are facing so many hardships nowadays. Most of the people who are engaged in primary sector, they would be engaged in cultivation, and their contribution to GDP is only around 16%. This means their productivity is very, very low with respect to the services and the manufacturing sector. Moreover, since the productivity is low, their output levels are low, the value of the output is low, the value of their contribution to the GDP is low, their remuneration would also remain low when compared to manufacturing or the services sector, which means those engaged in primary sector and specifically in the agriculture section of the society, they may find their vocation non-remunerative. They may not find their vocation, they may not find agriculture remunerative. They may find that they are not getting adequately compensated for the hard work that they are putting in their fields. And this is what is generally happening, and this is why so many people are quitting their traditional vocations of cultivating the fields and are moving to low paying jobs in manufacturing and the services sector in towns and cities. And this is causing a big wave of migration from rural to the urban areas as far as India is concerned. And secondly, since agriculture and the primary sector as a whole is not contributing much to the GDP, while on the other hand services sectors are contributing a lot to the GDP, that would also be witnessed income inequity, which means those who are engaged in the primary sector, specifically in the agriculture sector, they would be earning much less for probably the same amount of effort than those who are engaged in the services industries. And that is why most of the farmers in India, they find it really difficult to make their ends meet. Right? So this is another issue which is coming up, which is being caused by this unequal contribution to the GDP. And the reason behind the unequal contribution to GDP is the lack of efficiency and productivity in the primary sector. If you look at the growth in the agricultural sector, specifically in India, you would find that it is growing at around 2%. This is generally the maximum rate of growth that agriculture has been witnessing in the last few years. While on the other hand, many times you find that manufacturing and services grow at a better rate. So these are the problems that the primary sector and specifically the agricultural sections of our Indian society are facing. The agriculture cultivation is becoming less remunerative, forcing people to migrate from rural areas to urban areas in search of manufacturing or service sector jobs. And why is this so very problematic also? This we can understand because if so many people start quitting cultivation altogether, then what will happen is that we would not have adequate number of farmers left to produce food for our population, and which can endanger our food security also. So now these are the issues that come up when we take a deeper look at the agriculture and the non-agricultural sectors of the Indian economy. This discussion basically was to make you understand that agriculture is slowly becoming less remunerative, and that is why those farmers which are engaged in agriculture, they are facing more and more problems. Why is this important for us as a rural marketer? We should understand that the prosperity of rural markets, the prosperity of the farming community will ultimately translate into revenues for us, because only if the rural community, even if the farming community, only if the farming community is prosperous, then only they will be having disposable income to buy various products, goods and services, and then only as a marketer I can be hopeful of selling my goods and services in the rural areas and profit from this transaction. So the prosperity of the rural community, the prosperity of the farming community, the agricultural section of the society is very, very important for us as marketers, specifically if you are planning to expand from urban markets to rural markets. And that is why whenever there are some schemes launched for the upliftment of the standard of living of the rural community, it is welcomed by the industries and the businesses across the country. Thank you very much.